The Washington Capitals look like world beaters one night and look like they're a little bit lost on others. But what are they going to do with the trade deadline? And what are they doing with Evgeny Kuznetsov? We've got Dan Holmi of Locked On Caps to talk about all that and more next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Capitals, Dan Holmi. And Dan, never a dull moment with the Capitals right now. What's going on? One game they look like they could be cup contenders, and another game, in fact, sometimes the very next game, they look a little lost out there on the ice. What's going on?
Well, can you pause 1 second here?
Yeah.
So it has been an up and down season for the Capitals for sure. This team is much like a pendulum. 1 minute they win, the next minute they lose, and it's hard to gauge the trajectory of this team. You know, I take a look at the last game against the Flyers, and I was riding the high. I was drinking the Capitals Kool-Aid. But then, you know, I take a look at the game where they fell on their face against the Red Wings, and then they picked up a big win against the Senators, and then they lose to the lowly Coyotes. So to say I know what this team is going to do from one game to the next, I think I would have to get into fortune telling in order to do that. But I think that ultimately that is why you see the Capitals in the position that they're at now, and ultimately why I think the Capitals will be sellers at the deadline that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But an up and down season. The thing that I like about it is the integration of youth. This team is one of the older teams roster-wise in the NHL, but they're getting young, and they're getting younger based on necessity. You saw what happened with Kuznetsov, we'll talk about later. Nick Backstrom, TJ Oshie, who's injured. So this aging core is slowly peeling off and going away. So you're seeing the integration of Hendrix Lapierre and Connor McMichael that despite the outcome of this season, I think that the Capitals will be a good team in years to come. But at this point, and again, like I talked about, it's the pendulum that swings back and forth. The inconsistency is what has me worried. I think that to a lot of Capitals fans, we want to cling on that they can do it. But with a loss, a decisive loss to the Coyotes today, it draws everything into question for me.
Talk to me a little about Alex Ovechkin. Slow start, obviously, to the seasons, kind of picked things up a little bit recently. Where is he at, and what do you think the big reason is for the decline, basically, in his statistics?
Well, decline, I mean, if I'm going to generalize the season overall, but he is a changed man after the All-Star break. I think that he found his game when he was riding around on a camel in Dubai with his wife and kids during the All-Star break. And he came back and he said that, you know, I put hockey in the rear view. I didn't think about hockey. I didn't do anything about hockey. And I think that that is what really helped him out. And it reinvigorated him. When he came, he was a changed man and has actually is projected now to get 20 or 25 goals on the season. And if memory serves, before the All-Star break, he had 9 goals. Now, listen, this is a far cry from a 40 or 50 goal season that we're used to from the grade 8. But it's interesting that he can turn on the Jets that when he wants to. And much like a lot of his teammates said, don't ever discount him. Don't ever count out Alex Ovechkin, because he'll prove you wrong every single time.
Absolutely. I've seen it so many times over the course of his illustrious career. Let's talk about the Kuznetsov situation. Obviously, you placed on waivers earlier this week, cleared waivers. What happens next for Evgeny Kuznetsov? And I'm assuming he's played his last game with the Washington Capitals.
Well, according to Elliot Friedman during the broadcast today of the game, it was said that he cleared waivers. And from the press conference yesterday, GM Brian McClellan said that the plan is to send him to Hershey. Now, I've heard through some channels, not super official, that he has said that if he's getting sent down to Hershey, that's beneath him. There's no way that he will play AHL hockey. If that is the case, potentially that could terminate his contract, and then that would open up possibilities for him to pursue different teams in the NHL or potentially to play back in his homeland of Russia. To a certain extent, I wonder if Brian McClellan kind of judged what kind of person Evgeny Kuznetsov is, knowing that if I put him on waivers, he's not going to play down there anyway. And guess what? Ka-ching, ka-ching, we get some more money to spend. Because as it stands right now, if he does play for the Hershey Bears, he will be the most expensive AHLer in the entire American Hockey League. So as far as Evgeny Kuznetsov goes, 2 times he's been in the Players Assistance Program. Ultimately, Evgeny Kuznetsov, the man, the husband, the guy outside of hockey, I wish him nothing but the best, but he's got to get his game together. He's got to get his personal life together. And, you take a look at Anthony Mantha. Sometimes don't discount these guys, because last summer I said Anthony Mantha's done. Just do whatever it takes to get him out of here. And what did he do this year? He scored 20 goals. So the same thing for Kuzi. Potentially he is a first-round draft pick in 2010 that potentially he could find a home somewhere else. It's interesting, just briefly here, talking about Barry Trotz, now the GM of the Nashville Predators. He was all in on Kuzi last summer. But it didn't come out. It would have been a deal that would have sent Duchesne to the Capitals, which would have been a nice return, but ultimately it fell apart. So obviously there are, teams out there that see some intrinsic qualities in him. It's just that I think they want to see those qualities without the big cap hit.
So the trade deadline is now less than a week away. You hinted earlier that you think the Capitals will be sellers. If that's true, who do you think they would be looking to move? Who's available if they're selling at the deadline?
Well, Brian McClellan made it very clear yesterday that he's not going to just dump players to dump players, despite the fact that you hear Friedman and Saravalli, and they have all these names that they have circled of players on the move. He's like, listen, if we can get a young player like a Rasmus Sandin last year, then we'll do it. But we're not going to just dump guys to dump guys. He also mentioned that we're not going to be into rentals. Of course, if the perception is that the Capitals are out of it, why would you need a rental? But there are some intriguing names that I've heard out there. I've heard Noah Hannafin. I've heard different names like that potentially could be on the move there. And would Noah Hannafin make the Capitals that much better? Of course. What would the ask be? Everything I've heard is a first-round pick and some other draft picks plus some NHL players. So as far as names on the move, the big ones are Anthony Mantha. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer. Max Pacioretty, who has a limited amount of teams he will go to. Joel Edmondson, who the Capitals picked up last summer, who Montreal is retaining 50% of his salary. That would be, good for another team. Also, Nicolas Aube-Kubel, Nick Dowd. That one would hurt quite a bit. He is a huge, huge player. Any team that he goes to is already going to get that much better. And Nick Jensen as well. We saw some gaps in his defense today. I've heard that Toronto is all in on Nick Jensen. And the other one not listed on here that's been rumored, even though it's out there, is Charlie Lindgren, the outlaw, because there's 1 year left on his deal. He is a backup netminder, but plays a lot better than a lot of teams starting netminders. But my hunch is they hold on to Chucky Sideburns until the summer, the draft, that kind of thing, where they can maximize the return. The Capitals can demand the King's ransom for Charlie Lindgren, and they very well might get it.
We shall see. And what are they looking to get back? I know getting younger is one thing, but is there a position that they're looking more to emphasize?
Absolutely. Like I talked about earlier there, Rasmus Sandin was we remember that Hathaway and Orlov went out to Boston. In return, we got some draft picks. We sent that draft picked up to Toronto. We got Sandin. So that helped the Capitals blue line for the present and the future. They want to do something similar to that this year, where if they move out, say someone like a Mantha or a Dowd, they get some good draft picks that they can in turn flip to get that forward. this year. Instead of a blue liner, get a forward this year because that is what this team wants to do. They're trending in the direction of getting younger. So if they can get someone like Erasmus Sandin, except for a forward, that's ultimately what they're looking for. As far as the Capitals at the trade deadline, you take a look at Anthony Mantha. Are you going to trade Anthony Mantha for an Anthony Mantha type player? Is that a win? That seems kind of crazy. And Nick Dowd as well. My hunch is that you will see some bundling going on together. Anthony Mantha by himself, I don't know how much that's going to yield, but say you took Mantha plus Nick Dowd together, you could get a pretty handsome return on a deal like that.
All right, Dan, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter or X at Locked On Caps, and also me personally at DanCaps218. Of course, the podcast is available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube, including the SiriusXM app.
All right, Dan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive prop bets, and more. And look, it's not just the NBA. You've got college basketball. You've got hockey. And, of course, baseball spring training underway right now. Check out the odds for your favorite hockey team now on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and shoot your shot. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.